Welcome, everyone. We're about to begin our next session. I'm Bernard Fallon, Deputy Vice President of Industry Programs for Bio. Very glad to be with you today. You're here for a very exciting session that connects beautifully with the theme of this year's convention, which is where breakthroughs in business, where business and breakthroughs converge. We're going to hear about a new book that is available in the sales pavilion, available for a book signing after this session, Superconvergence. This event wouldn't be possible without the support of Bio sponsors. We thank them for their support. In addition, the details of today's presenter are in the Bio Events app. If you haven't downloaded it yet, use the QR code on the back of your registration badge, and there you can get the full background of our speaker, of this session, of all the sessions on our program. Today we'll be hearing from Jamie Metzl, one of the world's leading technology and healthcare futurists, and founder and chair of the global social movement One Shared World. In addition, his prior bestseller, Hacking Darwin, Genetic Engineering and the Future of Humanity, really connected with the issues of biotechnology, bringing them to a broader audience. And here we'll be hearing about how biotechnology, AI, and other dramatic themes are converging in new and interesting and complicated ways. Do be thinking of your questions. We will be leaving time for questions at the end of this session. There are microphone stands in the audience, so when we turn to that, be ready to engage with our speaker. And now, if I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Jamie Metzl.
Thank you so much, Bernard, and thanks so much to all of you. It's really just my tremendous honor and pleasure to be here with all of you, because let's be honest, the issues that you are dealing with are some of the most interesting and exciting issues in the world. We are at this incredible moment in human history where our one species, among the billions that has ever lived, suddenly has the increasing ability to engineer novel intelligence and re-engineer life. And the question for all of us is whether we can do that wisely and well. That's why we're here. I was just speaking with John a moment ago backstage, and I was saying that when I saw Viola Davis on the agenda for the conference, I was thinking, well, I love Viola Davis as an actress, but why is she speaking at Bio? And I was sitting there, I think like all of you, and I understood completely and innately. Because what she was grappling with, the story of her life, was what does it mean to be a human being? And that's what my talk is about today. What does it mean to be a human being in the context of radical and revolutionary technological change? And if you want to leave right now, I'll just tell you the summary. The summary is, if we want for this to turn out well, we each and all have a critical responsibility in building that kind of future. As Bernard mentioned, my new book is actually coming out next Tuesday. So they're giving away free copies in that main room where the lunch is, and I'll be signing them at 4. So literally, you guys are the first people on planet Earth, ahead of my girlfriend and everybody else, to actually get copies of this book. And it's beyond thrilling for me to see people actually walking around with it. And the book is about these big questions: superconverging technologies, genetics, biotech, AI. And when we think about these big terms and these big trends, there's a tendency to think of them as abstract, in some ways bigger than us. And that's why what Viola Davis was saying and what we're all here for is so important. And so before I talk about the technology itself, I'd like to personalize this topic, at least for me. These people are my parents, Marilyn and Kurt Metzl. My mother was born in New York and then met my father when she was in graduate school. She practiced for her whole life as a psychoanalyst, and now they're living in an assisted living facility, and my 86-year-old mother is still seeing patients virtually in her psychoanalytic practice. My father came to the United States as a refugee from Austria following the war, was resettled with his parents to Kansas City, which is where I grew up. And like many immigrants and refugees in those days, he socialized, he became an American through sports. And so my father is a fanatic Kansas City sports fan. And I'll get to why that's important for this story in a moment. He went to medical school. He became a community pediatrician in Kansas City and practiced for 55 years. As a matter of fact, when I ran for United States Congress 21 years ago, and I'd be way out in the suburbs, I'd knock on every door in the neighborhood, and somebody would say, "Oh, your dad saved me," or "Your mom saved my family," and it was just very, very rewarding for me. And this is me with my parents 2 years ago. This is my dad a little less than 2 years ago. You're not all from Kansas City, so you're probably not aware that hand signal in Kansas City means "I love you. Welcome to Kansas City." This picture was taken soon after my dad received his diagnosis for stage 4 metastatic neuroendocrine cancer. Neuroendocrine cancer is the kind of cancer that killed Steve Jobs. And the prognosis at this time was actually pretty bleak. We estimated that he had about 6 to 9 months of healthy living. The oncologist, they recently moved to Denver. The oncologist put him on a chemo, which was the standard first stage therapy for this cancer. And I gave him at that time, in the beginning, just after his prognosis, I gave him a Kansas City Chiefs hat. And I said, "You've got to wear this hat because the Kansas City Chiefs are counting on you for your support, and you can't let them down, so you've got to stay strong." And so literally every waking hour, my dad was wearing that hat. I probably got 10 text messages a day. Every time there was some little change with the Chiefs, I got a message about it. And last year, I was in Dubai. It was the middle of the night. I was on the FaceTime with my dad when the Chiefs were playing. I don't know if there are any football fans here, but in last year's Super Bowl, the Chiefs actually won. And so I thought, oh, this is so great. My dad held on till last year's Super Bowl. He got a Super Bowl victory under his hat. That's really amazing. And then soon after that Super Bowl, we got the information from the scans, and unfortunately, we found that my dad's chemo, while he was tolerating it, wasn't working very well. And so the cancer was actually spreading, starting at stage 4. And he wasn't, it turned out, a candidate for radiation therapy. And so the oncologist was recommending that the next thing we do was actually a pretty aggressive chemotherapy regimen that had about a 30% chance of helping him, but a 100% chance of knocking him on his rear. So it was a very, very aggressive chemotherapy. But after his diagnosis, I was in the middle of writing the healthcare chapter of my book, and I live in the world through Singularity University and NextMed Health of the future of healthcare. And I was writing and thinking a lot about the future of healthcare and cancer care. So from the beginning, I insisted that we sequence the tumor cells. And I insisted that we send biopsies to go see if we could develop those cells into organelles to test different treatments, which wasn't standard treatment for this type of cancer. But the oncologist was really great, open-minded young physician in Denver, and he agreed to work with me, and we were really partners. And the information came back from Tempus, the sequencing company, that my dad actually had a rare targetable mutation, a BRAF mutation. And the treatment for the BRAF mutation in this particular treatment had been generically accepted by the FDA about 3 weeks before. And nobody with my dad's cancer and this mutation had been treated in this way. And what I said to the oncologist is, look, if we go with this chemo, my dad's in his late 80s. If we knock him on his rear now, who knows if he'll ever get back up. Let's just go for it. Maybe this will work, maybe it won't work, but it's worth the risk. So we talked about it at length, and we agreed to do it. This is this year's Super Bowl. My dad, when we had the initial prognosis, the oncologist said the best that we can do is slow the spread. And now my dad is in such remission that the oncologist last week, I'll show you, last week the oncologist and his 2 residents published this paper in the Journal of GI Cancer recommending this treatment, which my dad is an N of 1, as a new first-line therapy for people with neuroendocrine cancer with my dad's specific mutation. And not only that, in this time, in addition to the Super Bowl, my father attended his granddaughter's bat mitzvah, her 8th grade graduation in Denver, and my parents are flying to New York on Saturday to be at my New York book launch on Tuesday. Thank you. This is why we're here. This is why we do what we do. This is why people like John have just been heroes, saying, if there's an unsolvable problem, I'm not going to accept it as unsolvable, because maybe it's solvable. And the only way we're going to find out whether an unsolvable problem is actually solvable is by trying to solve it. So I said I'm here wanting to talk about the future of technology and how these pieces fit together. So let's take another step back. Raise your hand if you have played around in any way with ChatGPT. Good. All right, that's pretty much everybody. For most of us, ChatGPT feels like a really cool Google that sometimes makes stuff up. And that's actually, it's pretty exciting. I mean, it's pretty incredible that we can have that thing, but I think we need to think about it a little bit differently. If I asked you, how did electricity influence your life today? You could not answer that question. You could say, well, I woke up with an alarm clock, and it's like, well, wait a second, but I'm in Southern California, and I was sleeping because there's air conditioning. Oh, and I was in a hotel that exists because of electricity, and I'm wearing clothes that exist because of electricity, and just electricity isn't a thing where you say, hey, now I'm going to do electricity. Electricity is just woven in to every aspect of our lives. And that's how we need to think about these technologies. There are lots of people who say, hey, I went on ChatGPT and I was really disappointed because it got this answer wrong. And we should be worried when it gets answers wrong. But the real issue is, how are these technologies being woven into our lives, just like electricity, like agriculture? Like, we can't distill agriculture from our lives. Most of us are only here because of agriculture. Our civilizations exist because of agriculture. So let's take an even bigger step back. 100 years ago, there were about 100 years ago, there were 2 billion people on Earth with a roughly 15% literacy rate. And so that means about 300 million people able to participate in the world of knowledge shared beyond their immediate communities, which was pretty great. You could do a lot. You could have the whole Roman Empire. You could have the whole Mongol Empire. But now we have 8 billion people, 85% literacy rate. That means nearly 7 billion people able to participate in the world of knowledge shared beyond their communities. And because we're all networked to each other, nobody needs to solve a problem that's already been solved. I'm sure you remember from your early schooling those ages, the Bronze Age, Copper Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, and all of these ages, and how there were thousands of years of separation between those ages in different parts of the world. And so while different civilizations were doing different things and solving different problems, from the perspective of what you could do with copper or bronze or iron, there were whole civilizations that weren't able to contribute for thousands of years because they didn't have the recipes for those metals. They couldn't come up with the implements, the weapons, all the other things, the cooking utensils. Now we don't have that problem. Everybody who solves a problem, it immediately gets shared through our communications network. And so every morning, this number of people, which is 4 times the number of 100 years ago, and many more times the number of literate people from 100 years ago, are waking up and with a reset baseline of new problems. And not only that, the technologies that we are using are, referencing the title of my book, superconverging. So like I said before, agriculture is embedded in the technology of our civilizations, in our cities. And our writing codes are embedded in our computer codes. And our computer codes make our machine learning possible. And machine learning makes AI possible. And with the tools of AI, we are interrogating evolved biological designs and looking at things like the patterns that leaves use to distribute nutrients and saying, how can we make better computer chips using these evolved biological models? And so it's a cycle. And because of this, our rate of change is accelerating. It's how people talk about exponential change, but what does it really mean? Well, it means that when change is accelerating, if you baseline change based on your historical experience of it, you're going to be too conservative because it's accelerating. And so in many ways, we need to force ourselves to overcome the natural, evolved conservatism of our brains. And that really requires taking a step back. And just to give 2 essential points, one about speed and one about problem solving, let's just go through the last 8 years of one company, which, as many of you are familiar with, is Google DeepMind. So in 2016, Google DeepMind came up with its now famous program, AlphaGo. And AlphaGo was trained on the digitized games of Go from human Go masters. And so learning from that data set with the DeepMind algorithm, AlphaGo was able to defeat the then world champion, Lee Sedol, 4 games out of 5 in a famous competition in Seoul, Korea. The next year, AlphaGo faced a new competitor, which was AlphaZero. AlphaZero wasn't given access to any of the digitized games of Go. It was given the basic rules of Go and given a reward system, a tokenized reward system, saying, all right, you play games against yourself. If you make a move that increases your odds of winning, you get a positive reinforcement. If you make a move that decreases your costs of winning, you get a negative reinforcement. And so AlphaZero started playing against itself. It was terrible. It got a little better, a little better, a little better. How long do you think it took before AlphaZero was able to defeat AlphaGo, who the year before had defeated the world's greatest human Go champion? 3 days. As a matter of fact, it was 9 hours before AlphaZero became the greatest chess player in all of history. So we're seeing this acceleration. But DeepMind, they said, well, we're not in the business of playing games. We're in the business of solving problems. And so the next year, 2018, they announced the release of AlphaFold. And as you all know, one of the stickiest problems in biology is predicting the shapes of proteins based on sequence strings of amino acids. And as you know better than anybody, if you just know the sequence of a protein, it doesn't really tell you that much about how that protein is going to function or interact, because the sequence of the amino acids and the shape of the protein are both essential. And so there's a biannual competition to predict the shapes of these proteins from the sequence amino acids. AlphaFold was entered in 2018. It came in a disappointing 20th place. But the Google DeepMind team took a step back, rejiggered the algorithm, came back in 2020 and actually won the competition so handily that Nature magazine declared that the challenge of predicting the shape of proteins from amino acids had been solved. All right, then what? The next year, 2021, DeepMind released the predicted shapes of 350,000 proteins, including all of the proteins in the human body. So by the state-of-the-art technology for characterizing a protein from just a few years before of X-ray crystallography, it would take about 3 years to characterize one protein. And the way you would characterize it is you crystallize the protein, and then you take a bunch of images, and you get a shape of the protein, and then you match that protein with the sequence. So with 350,000 times 3 years, which is what it would have taken to characterize each one of these proteins, it's a little more than 1 million years thrown back into the pot of human innovation. Meaning that 1 million years of time that people in universities and companies might have spent characterizing a protein can be spent figuring out what to do with a protein that's already been characterized. It's the same point I was making earlier about the base getting reset every morning for all of us. That's 2021. The next year, 2022, DeepMind with the European Bioinformatics Institute released the predicted shapes of 214 million proteins. 214 million times 3, 642 million years of time thrown back into the pot of human innovation. Last year, Google DeepMind, again, this one company, released AlphaMissense, which is basically, it sequenced the genomes of humans and 32 other primates to try to identify which variants of unknown consequence in humans were actually more benign than less, with the idea that if a bunch of different primates had the same genes or genetic patterns, those were probably relatively safe because they'd been protected in these multiple species. And so they were able to make pretty good predictions about 71 million different mutations. And then this year, Alpha Geometry competed at the highest level, at the gold medal level in geometry, compared to human high schoolers in the Olympics of math. And just a little more than a month ago, AlphaFold 3 was released, which is able to essentially predict the shapes not just of proteins, but proteins, DNAs, RNAs, and other structures, and begin to model their interactions. So what does this all mean? I mean, obviously, it's incredible acceleration. Obviously, there's just a lot of time that is going back into the pot of human innovation. And if we can solve problems of this complexity in this one domain, how many other problems are there in our world of equal or lesser complexity? And these algorithms are learning. You may have seen the information from news from a couple of weeks ago about the launch of GPT-4o, which scooped the Google Gemini 1.5 Pro. And basically what was kind of exciting for people is that these programs were using the cameras and the microphones on our iPhones and computers to see the world, to hear the world, to interact with the world in a very rudimentary way. But there was a time 531 million years ago when our ancestors, who were these relatively simple multicellular organisms, first had the ability to perceive light. And that ability to perceive light has evolved into our eyes. These AI systems are growing up. This is a metaphor, Mr. Potato Head. We just stuck eyes and ears on Mr. Potato Head. We've already got a mouth. Is a nose coming? Are legs coming? These systems are growing. They are evolving. I talked in the beginning about we are creating a novel intelligence, human-engineered intelligence. People talk about artificial general intelligence, AGI. I, for one, have no clue what that possibly means, because it can't mean doing everything that humans do. Why would we want machines that do what we do? We are bipedal African hominins who've evolved over 3.8 billion years with all of these different drives and emotions and complexities, and that's great. That's what makes us humans. We don't want to build machines doing that. We're creating a new thing, a novel form of intelligence that will evolve not to be like us, but it will evolve alongside us to be whatever it is. And the rubber will hit the road in the applications. This isn't about the technologies, it's about what we're doing with the technologies. I think many of you, or even most of you here, are in the world of healthcare. This will fundamentally and is fundamentally transforming our world of healthcare, where we're transitioning from our current world of generalized medicine based on population averages, which is if you go to a doctor in any most parts of the world, you'll be treated because you are you, to our new world of personalized or precision healthcare, because when we're treated just as being humans, it doesn't take into account our individuality. And so if you are normal people and you go and you take a Tylenol, it's fine. If you're somebody who actually has an adverse reaction to Tylenol in our current system, you find out when you're dialing 911 because of that adverse reaction. It's the same with most of our cancer treatments, where they say, we're going to start you on this and go to that. I was just in a session before this about psychiatric care, where basically there's so little data, and the way it's like, well, I hear you saying that you're not sleeping and you're feeling down, we're going to try you on this, and if it doesn't work, come back. It's a great way to do healthcare, unless there's a better way to do healthcare, and there is, and that's our world of personalized or precision healthcare, and everybody is here because you're part of that world. And so as part of personalized and precision healthcare, we just need to collect massive amounts of data, because we need to know who everybody is on an individual and a molecular level, and so certainly we're going to collect more information. Everyone's whole sequence genome is going to become a foundation of all of our electronic health records. But as we learn more about complex systems biology, I think we're going to think it's less about genetics and genomics than we currently believe. We are not genetics and a bunch of other stuff. We are a system, a very complex systems biology. And we're going to learn more about all of these dynamic systems and how they interact. And that is going to be the future of our healthcare, with precision and prevention. And it's going to make all kinds of magical things possible. This, as some of you may know, is Victoria Gray, who was one of the first people treated successfully with gene therapy for sickle cell disease. And I'm in touch with her now. She's actually, I have her picture in my book, and I had the pleasure of sending her a signed copy last week. But it's just an incredible story that she had this disease that for her was a death sentence. She was feeling that life wasn't worth living. And now, because of the magic that you all are involved in, we're in a new era of gene therapies, and we're hearing a lot about it at this conference, a new era of pharmacogenomics, a new era of using AI and other tools to try to develop new hypotheses, new drugs, new treatment protocols to evaluate data. And that's basically the formula, which is the more and better high quality data, the more compute power, and the better algorithms, the better able we will be to understand complex patterns that go way beyond the capacity of our unaided brains. And as we do that, we are going to then transition to the next phase beyond precision healthcare, which is predictive and preventive, as our data sets get bigger and better. And we're going to realize that we live within a range, in many ways, of biological, but also environmental, but biological possibility. And the goal of healthcare, and maybe life, will be how do we optimize at the upper end of that range of possibility? And are there specific areas where we can go beyond? We're already doing that. My guess is, I hope everyone in this room, or most everyone in this room, is vaccinated, so you're already going beyond your innate capabilities. Maybe there are people with pacemakers, cochlear implants, glasses, all of these kinds of things. So that's already what we're doing, but we're going to find other ways. And that's going to be the future of healthcare. But this isn't, as I said in the beginning, just about the future of healthcare. It's not even about the future of us. It's about human beings renegotiating our relationship with the living world, and that's going to touch everything. It's going to have massive implications for plant agriculture. The reason we could go from 2 billion people 100 years ago to 8 billion now is not just agriculture, it's industrial agriculture. It's the tools that we innovated here in the United States and Britain before and exported around the world through the Green Revolution, using chemical fertilizers and advanced seeds and all these other kinds of things. That's why we have so many people now. But we have a problem if we just scale up agriculture as we're doing it now to accommodate the roughly 10 billion people we will have toward the end of this century, including poorer people who are getting wealthier and wanting to have diets and lifestyles more like ours. We're going to have to decimate our planet. We're going to have to destroy all of our wild spaces. So we need greater agricultural productivity, but we can't just scale up what we're doing. And the tools of biotechnology are one essential tool to help us do that, using capabilities like genome editing to increase the productivities of plants, looking at the microbiome lining the roots of plants and in the soils to try to say, how do we stimulate growth and better growth, perhaps using less fertilizers? Certainly, if we can think differently about agriculture, it's going to say a lot for climate change. About a third of human greenhouse gas emissions are connected to agriculture. We can't scale up. We need to think of things differently. And animal agriculture is the most important part of that, because of our total plant agriculture, about 3/4 of the land used for agriculture and about 3/4 of the climate emissions for agriculture go towards supporting animal agriculture, mostly industrial animal agriculture. The right answer is for all of us to be vegetarians. It's the right answer. Unfortunately, we're not going to do it. Even with all of the awareness of vegetarianism, per capita consumption of animal products in this country and in Europe is going up. So yes, more of us should eat more of our diets, more vegetables in our diet, absolutely. But we need to think of a way, because we are humans, to say, well, how can we get the animal products that we need without the negative consequences? Because the negative consequences are pretty huge. They include deforestation, climate change, increased risk of pandemics, overuse of antibiotics. We could go on and on about these negative consequences. And it turns out, I guess you're getting the theme here, biotechnology has a critically important potential, but I think realizable role to play in this process. Because if you wanted to have, let's say, meat, and it takes 30 calories of plant to get 1 calorie of beef, what if we could just grow the healthiest cow we possibly have, give it a great life, extract a few cells, a few stem cells, grow those cells in a lab, and then transfer those to an industrial bioreactor, and grow the types of animal products and milks and meats that we need. So 10 years ago, when Mark Post in the Netherlands innovated with this, the first cell-cultured or cultivated burger cost about $325,000 to produce. Now it's $10. And if the traditional animal products weren't so heavily subsidized, we would be moving toward parity. For sure, there are issues of cost and scale. And as a matter of fact, people in this room who are thinking about industrial bioreactors in the pharma world actually have a very significant role to play, thinking about how can we scale up cell-cultured animal products. And I believe it's possible. It's one of these impossible dreams that we can make possible through our efforts. Spider silk is one of the coolest, most exciting substances in the world. It's stronger than Kevlar, stretchier than our stretchier elastics. And you could say, oh, this is so great. Why don't we build a community of spiders like we have communities of silkworms and let them just make all the spider silk that we want. And so, of course, the answer to that is spiders are cannibals, so we'd end up with one super spider, so we can't do that. But the tools of the genetics and biotechnology revolutions are giving us new ways to synthetically engineer E. coli bacteria to produce spider silk, to genetically alter silkworms. So we now have silkworms that produce spider silk. We now have goats that are producing spider silk enzymes in their milk. It's a growing industry, and this is just one small example, but the broader point is that we are in the process, if we are successful, moving to a world where we cut down or dig up the raw materials that we need, moving from that to our new world where we grow those materials. I contributed to a McKinsey report on the biorevolution a few years ago, and in that report estimated that about 60% of all of the inputs, all of the industrial inputs to the world economy could be conceivably replaced with materials grown through synthetic biology. It's not going to happen overnight, but our entire structure of industrialization, with all of its draws on raw materials and natural resources, it's not that old. Like, we haven't been making petroleum the way that we've been doing it forever. These are relatively new industries, but speaking of petroleum, we're entering a new era of biofuels. The first era of biofuels was kind of a bust. Ethanol was essentially taking food supplies, so it didn't really help us all that much. But now the next generation of biofuels are taking parts of domesticated plants that we don't eat, and so that's certainly encouraging. And then we have these massive biological structures, like maybe you've heard of the floating blob in the Gulf of Mexico, about 50 miles long, of sargassum, which is a kind of seaweed. And essentially, this was created because the flows of fertilizers down the Mississippi River created this space where there's this massive thing. And we just tried to throw it away, or some of it sunk to the bottom of the ocean. But that is starting to be seen as a seed, a seed stock for creating new biofuels. And if we can make new biofuels, we can make new plastics. And so that's why people call it synthetic biology. But really, what we're talking about is nature co-design. We don't know enough about biology to engineer biology from scratch, Craig Venter notwithstanding. What we're doing is tinkering at the edges of biotechnology, as we've done for at least 10,000 years, to try to repurpose it for our needs. I could go on, but data storage is another area where right now we talk about the cloud. With cloud computing, we have this feeling like there's just data floating in the sky above us. But actually, as you all know, this data is in our data centers. It's on magnetic tapes that can, on average, last about 30 to 50 years. And so that means that we're having to copy stuff over and over. And about every 2 years, we're creating more data than all of human history up to that point. That's a lot of data. And this data is really important. We're not any smarter than our ancestors 10, 20, 30,000 years ago. The reason we can live our lives as we do is because we are beneficiaries of this cultural history. This data is our cultural history. And so DNA, under the right conditions, can last up to 5 million years. There are issues, again, cost and scale. The cost of retrieving it is much more expensive than traditional silicon chips. But that's why there's a huge amount of effort going into this space. But there's a problem. We humans are complicated beings. Darwin, the Darwinian drivers of evolution, are random mutation and natural selection. In our context, what that means, how this is pushing all of this forward, is diversity and competition. Diversity, meaning we're all different within our societies, between our societies, and competition because we are competing with each other, whether it's competing as companies or as nations, and we're seeing this arms race around the world, frankly, in every one of these technologies. And the question is, what does that mean? And there are huge dangers. There's a reason why humans have anxiety. It's not some kind of wasted evolutionary feeling that just stuck around for no reason. We have anxiety because that's nature's way of having us tell ourselves, hey, maybe there's something that could go wrong. And when we feel there's something that could go wrong, we motivate to try to address it. So after the first CRISPR babies were born in China in 2018, I was invited by Dr. Tedros, the WHO Director General, to be a member of the WHO Expert Advisory Committee on Human Genome Editing. And it was my view then, and it is my view now, that there very, very likely will be a place for the editing, the genomic editing of pre-implanted human embryos in the future to address very specific and I believe necessary needs. But that doesn't mean that we're there now, and it doesn't mean that He Jiankui, the Chinese scientist, wasn't wildly unethical in taking the steps that he did, and it doesn't mean that we don't need to be really anxious about this so we can develop the kinds of governance and accountability systems that we need, and certainly our committee worked very hard for 2.5 years on that. COVID-19 is an incredible story of going, as I think many people in this room were involved with this, going from a sequenced genome to a highly effective vaccine in 11 months. It was just an unbelievable success. But as some of you may know, I've been at the center for the last 4.5 years of the debate about COVID-19 origins. It's my personal view that I've expressed very clearly, and I've laid out the evidence many, many times, that by far the most likely origin scenario is a research-related incident in Wuhan. Not a kind of bioweapon, but very well-intentioned scientists who actually made a mistake and didn't know it in the beginning. This is me. I was the lead witness in the first congressional hearings on COVID-19 origins. You may have seen that Dr. Fauci testified yesterday to this same hearing. And these are really difficult issues, but these same technologies that are giving us these incredible possibilities to do great things also pose very significant threats to us. And that's the job. If this was, hey, this is an easy one, it's all a good story, that's great. But it's most likely a good story, but it requires us doing it. As I mentioned, I'm deeply involved with the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization wasn't that successful in the early days of the COVID-19 outbreak, not because there's something wrong, not because they did anything wrong, but the WHO has a smaller budget than an average American teaching hospital. It controls 20% of its own resources, and essentially its governing states have a veto over what it does. So it wasn't able to get the information that it needed. Just last week, the World Health Assembly ended its meetings in Geneva, and there's a plan over the course of the year to negotiate the new pandemics treaty. But none of the options for the pandemics treaty, the conceivable options, had that exact new treaty been in place in 2019, no conceivable one of those treaties could or would have prevented COVID-19. And so we have a problem that there's a mismatch between the nature of the greatest challenges we face, and whether it's climate change, pandemics, proliferating nuclear weapons, or managing, governing very powerful technologies for the common good, and the absence of a framework for solving that entire category of problems. And as I said in the beginning, what we need to know is the only way we're going to do that is together. I wish I could say, oh, the World Health Organization has a plan, everybody sit back and just let them do it. Or the United States government has a plan, everybody sit back and let them do it. But what we came up with in our WHO Human Genome Editing Committee, and which is just the basic reality, is governance is about what all of us do. It's about every person, every company, every researcher, and everybody has a role to play in that process. In the book, I have a whole framework, which I won't go into now, but I hope you'll all read the book, and because they're just giving it away, I hope you'll get it. It's in the main hall after we speak. But the way we're going to manage these capabilities is together. And that means everybody in this room doubling down on the amazing things that you're doing, but it also means recognizing that as you do so, you have a very significant responsibility. In the early days of the pandemic, I was the founder of a global interdependence movement called One Shared World, oneshared.world, and the basic idea is that we need a global operating systems upgrade. In the middle of the 17th century in Europe, after the 30 Years' War, there was a realization that the system of kind of every Tom, Dick, or Harry claiming sovereignty didn't work, and so the idea of the modern nation state was established in the Peace of Westphalia. In 1945, after World War II, there was a sense that just a bunch of nation states competing with each other wasn't stable, and so that was why the UN system, the Bretton Woods organizations were created. And now we're at another moment where we need to recognize that there needs to be a global OS upgrade, and the new model must be a recognition of the mutual responsibilities of complex global interdependence. One way of thinking about it is a Seurat painting, where each of us is a dot. And in our daily lives, we have to focus on being a dot. But we each have to recognize that we also play a role in the painting of this bigger picture. And you all have a role to play in that process. Individually, and this is just kind of a fun thing to take away, because a lot of people ask me, well, what should I be doing? How to think about integrating these technologies into my workflow and into my life. This isn't a complete answer, but just three of my ideas. One is we need to recognize that the future is not a future of humans alone. It's certainly not a future of technology alone, but it's human plus our technology, human plus AI. But how do we think about that? How do we do it? Well, even right now, if you think of every job can be broken into, let's just say, 10 subtasks. And you could take down a piece of paper. It's like, oh, here's my job, and there's 10 subtasks of this job. And for each one of those, say, do I think 10 years from now, this subtask is going to be more likely carried out by machines, by humans, or some kind of hybrid? If it's a machine task, you should be focused on learning, well, how can a machine do that task as well as possible? If it's a human task, you should really be doubling down, because we don't want to be second-rate machines. We need to be first-rate humans, and we're going to have to figure out what that means in this dynamic and changing context. And if it's a hybrid task, we're going to have to figure out, well, what's the right relationship with our machines? There's no easy answers to this, but we're all going to be a part of the process of learning and figure it out, which is why number two, it's not just never stop learning, but it's how to learn. Everybody in your role, whatever it is, you have the stuff in your line of sight. The thing that's pretty obvious to you, to do my job, I need to know this. What I'm telling you is you should be spending 2 hours a day learning adjacent stuff outside of your direct field of vision. Because the disruptions aren't coming from the things that you can see, it's the things over there. What are those things? Only you will know, and for sure, just let curiosity be your guide. Because no one knows the answer, but you're going to look at something, and something that you've seen a million times is going to look different for some reason. And you're going to say, why is that different? And you're going to see some little trend in some other place that's influencing that thing. And what I'm saying is follow that trend. I know 2 hours is a lot with busy lives, so I encourage you to multitask. I'm an ultramarathon runner, so I'm always listening to biology lectures while I'm going on runs. You can do multiple things at the same time. And then third and most important, values, values, values. I'm talking about technology, but this ultimately isn't a conversation about technology. It's a conversation about values. If you don't know what are your guiding North Star of principles, you're going to get lost. If we think this is about technology, we're going to show up in a world that's unrecognizable to us. This is about values, values, values. We are at this stage where we humans are assuming for ourselves powers and capabilities that for millennia we have attributed to our gods. And it's up to everyone to make sure that we use those powers wisely and well. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Jamie. You've given us a lot to think about, covering billions of years of biological history and civilization. Please, if you do have questions, we have time for a few questions. Please come to the microphone stands. There's one here in the middle of the round tables and one in the center aisle. As people are thinking through their questions and coming to the stand, maybe I'll start you off with a question here. You talked a lot about the great potential that science and these tools allow, and about some of the complexity and the risks. Could you say a little bit more about the known obstacles in the middle?
Yeah,
are there
for
economic issues or industry level issues that need to be addressed, repaired?
Yeah. There are so many known obstacles in the middle. As a matter of fact, just 2 days ago, I was in Lisbon and I was the keynote speaker for the embryologists, and I really loved it. It was my last book, Hacking Darwin, was on the future of human genetic engineering and assisted reproduction. And so I thought, well, that's really cool because the embryologists are just really right there in the beginning. And so I've written in the past about the future of in vitro gametogenesis, which is basically taking adult cells, inducing them into being stem cells, inducing those stem cells into, in most cases, egg precursor cells, and then those egg precursor cells into eggs. And so rather than having 10 eggs in the process of IVF, you could have 10,000, and then you fertilize all of them, and you can read in the last book, I talk about how we could push evolution through that process. But being with the embryologists who are actually solving that problem, I was reminded when I was in Kyoto and I met with the lab of Saito-san, who's the world's expert, and he's making just incredible progress in this IVG. And I said, well, how long do you think it's going to take to do this safely? And lots of people saying, oh, it's going to be 20 years, 30 years. And he said, oh, I think it's about 240 years. And so there's just doing this safely is really difficult. And if you get it wrong, which is certainly what happened in the first generation of gene therapies with the University of Pennsylvania, the entire field can be set back. Secondly, is we are talking about manipulating very complex biological systems we only minimally understand. If I had to, I ask people a lot, if understanding human biology completely is 100 and 0 is 0, where we are now, and I would say we're at about 3%. I think we understand about 3% of the total complexity of human biology. We can do a lot. All of healthcare exists within that. So that's certainly a big constraint. Biology gets a vote. These are regulated environments, and fear is actually a big issue. In the book, I talk about the Asilomar process from the 1970s. What is now called GMO was then called recombinant DNA. Scientists talk about Asilomar as the great success of scientific self-regulation. I think it is a pretty significant failure because there was an opportunity to engage the public in a way that didn't happen. And then when all this anti-GMO stuff happened, there wasn't a foundation of understanding or support. With all of the excitement that we have, there are a lot of roadblocks, and that's why we need to be very thoughtful about that. All right.
Jamie, thank you for inspiring us.
Could you step a little closer to the mic, please?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Monique. My name is Monique with Miner. Thank you for your inspiration, especially your dad's story, and for all that enabled that outcome. Can you speak a little bit more about the failure of even a framework to think about this convergence of biology and the potential in biotechnology, at the same time a race for technology and competition,
right,
and now being at the crosshairs with national security and industrial policy? Do we have a framework, or how should we be thinking about that?
So we are developing frameworks for on the national level. You're having Jason Kelly is speaking tomorrow morning about his role with Eric Schmidt and others in that committee. Every country has their national bio plan, and it's great, and we're pushing forward. What we don't have are international frameworks to manage competition between these countries, and we're frankly nowhere in those directions. As I said before, I think that's the story of the entire COVID-19 pandemic. I think that's the story of the CRISPR babies, and our ability to cooperate is actually getting worse and not better. There's some preliminary efforts on AI. There was a meeting last year in Bletchley Park in the UK. but it's not going to go anywhere because we're just seeing in the United States alone this incredible arms race. OpenAI, which was created as a not-for-profit to do AI research responsibly, became a for-profit, and when its own board said, hey, this isn't safe, it essentially kicked out its own board and then is trying to essentially scoop Google and every other company in order to speed up. So on a national level, we have everything in place to speed up. And that speeding up is in many ways great. It's going to help us solve a lot of problems. But if we don't think about where this is going and where we would like it to go, that's why I think we're in trouble. And that's why it's kind of abstract how I went from very specific problems in technology to we need a global operating system upgrade. But if you listen to any of these conversations on AI, on biotech, at the end of it, people say, what do we do? And the answer is always, I don't know, we need a framework, let's have a conversation. So we need to start answering that question. We will answer it. I'd rather answer it before a potential catastrophe rather than after. So thank you for that question, Monique. Yeah.
Hi, Jonah Comstock. That was a great talk, Jamie, thank you. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the environmental impact of these large language models, because you talked about you talked about climate change and sustainability, but the large language models themselves have a huge footprint, and we're kind of just replacing everything in the world with them. And I sort of worry that the remedy is worse than the disease or something. We're going to have to make the environment a lot worse before this technology leads us to the point where we make it better.
Yeah, it's a great question. That's one possibility. Certainly the LLMs are becoming essentially smaller and more efficient, but there's more of them. And so the total need of these, energy need of these LLMs is just expanding enormously. And so it's a problem. It may not be a problem if these LLMs can help us solve bigger problems that are taking more energy. And so it's unknown where this is going to go. So it's conceivable that we just get bigger and bigger algorithms because of these arms race dynamics. It's also conceivable that we come up with more efficient models. It's also conceivable that these new tools will help us do the things that I mentioned here, do agriculture more efficiently. And in the book, I have specific calculations of if we just, let's say, so about half of the animal meats that we eat are ground meat. If we just replaced the ground beef that we eat with ground cell-cultured meat, we could rewild just unbelievably large parts of the planet. So if we look at these problems individually, they can look really scary, and they may just be objectively scary individually. But that's why we need to kind of get to this big question, well, what are the problems that we're trying to solve? And then what's the prioritization of things that we want to do in order to solve those problems? I remember a few years ago, there were all these amazing, very well-intentioned young people who came to the conclusion that climate change equals plastic straws. And so there was this huge campaign, get rid of plastic straws, and lots of places now have, whatever they are, paper straws that don't seem to work. But it didn't do anything for climate change because that of the 20 biggest problems in climate change, the 100 biggest problems in climate change, plastic straws weren't one of them. So we really need to kind of take a step back and say, what are we trying to achieve? Certainly after Google purchased DeepMind, they used the DeepMind algorithm to make Google's data centers more efficient. But that's the thing, this is about solving problems. And sometimes every technology that we develop has upsides and downsides. Agriculture was great. We're here because of agriculture, but agriculture also made large-scale wars and pandemics and everything else possible. So it's a balance, and it's a trade-off. And that's why, again, maybe I'll end here. This is all about values. Values, 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 and that means it's all about us. So I'll give it to Bernard to close things out.
Yes, thank you, Jamie, for that. So we will be transitioning to the book signing in the sales pavilion, the room where the lunches were available earlier. If you haven't already picked up your book, we have them there. If you have it, bring it with you, and that's where we'll get it signed. So Jamie will be there in just a few moments, and there are lines and books set up in the sales pavilion. Thank you.